Hi guys, my name is Paul from Pro2 Studios in England, and I'm here today to show you how we can use extra computers, more commonly known as slaves, so we can harness the processing power of this extra computer to run more CPU intensive plugins. So here we go. On the right is the master computer running Pro Tools on Mac OS X. And then we run 3 i7 Windows machines, all using Magic Sequoia. I'll be demonstrating how this is done on one machine here on the left, and then the exact same principles will apply if you want to run several slaves. We use Pro Tools as the master because of the way it utilizes inserts, and then we use Sequoia basically because of the sonic quality of its audio engine. So we used interfaces to communicate with the slaves, and I guess the only reason why we chose this method is because we already had the ins and outs. I first slaved a Windows PC into a Mac system over 14 years ago, so we know this system works. It's incredibly stable, it's flexible, easy to configure, and probably more importantly, it's future-proof. There is no networking to be configured, and there is no need for any other third-party software. So there are several ways to connect multiple computers together, all with varying levels of pros and cons. So I suppose this video is just to show how it works for us. Now, because you might all be using different DAWs, we can only explain the principles of how this works, but then you'll be able to apply these principles to your own DAWs, interfaces, etc. So I'm going to explain 3 methods throughout this video of how this can be done, and there are 3 things that you need to know: the system delay, buffer size, and plugin latency. So I suppose the beauty of this in and out method is that each machine could be Mac or Windows. Each machine could be 32-bit or 64-bit. On each machine it could be any DAW, because it's basically the interfaces that are communicating with each other and not the actual programs itself. So let's start at the beginning with the interfaces. Here are 6 interfaces. There's 5 DigiDesign and there is 1 Prism. So let's venture behind to see how it's wired. Now your interfaces may be different. This is just to show you the principles of how we get in and out from the master to the slave, and this is how we do it. These are the DigiDesign interfaces down here, and these are the i7s, and in the i7s we are using RME PCIe Express cards. There's 2 types. There's the AES32, I think it is, which will give you 16 in and 16 out. They run on AES. And the other one is a PCIe Express RADAC card, which will give you 32 in and 32 out. And we use several of those. What you need to do is to connect from your DigiDesign, the digital output. You need to come out on 1, and then go into the i7 on 1, and then out of the i7 and back into the digital interface on the DigiDesign, so that you're connecting a loop basically of out on 1, in on 1, out of 1 on the i7 and back to the DigiDesign. And then you would do the same for channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, basically connecting the master to the slave and the slave back to the master for as many channels that you are able to run. Oh, and you might need a word clock cable as well to keep everything in sync if you're using the AES. So we've now configured our interfaces, and we've connected the 2 systems together via cables, whether that's ADAT, whether it's AES. I suppose it could be analog if you wanted, but there are many ways to do it. So then what we need to do, let me just take that off. Then what we need to do is that we need to be able to send the audio from Pro Tools down this channel into Sequoia and then back to Pro Tools, so that we can actually basically insert a channel of the slave. So we need to configure Pro Tools to do that. And we do that by going to the in-out section of Pro Tools, and we're going to hit the Insert tab. Just move you. And then what we'll do is we'll create a new path, a stereo one, create. And then we'll create 2 mono subpaths. And then we'll call them, let's say, slave 1 and 2, and slave 1 and 2, slave 1, 2. That's the stereo. These are going to be the 2 monos. So you've got a choice whether you go stereo or mono. You would then find the interface of what you want to use. You would then click here, here, and here. And then that's telling Pro Tools that you're going to send audio out of an insert on these particular channels. You would then go on and configure channels 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc., etc. And obviously I've done this already, so I'm not going to save that. I've already configured our ins and outs. So before we go any further, once you've done this in Pro Tools, it will then save this configuration in the I/O setup. So you only have to do this once. Once you've configured all your 16, 24 or 32 channels, it is then saved in Pro Tools, and it will always come up. Every time you open a Pro Tools session, it will always be there. What happens here is that these are basically insert points. There's 10 here on Pro Tools, and these 5 here are basically sends. So just like you would basically put, let's say, a plugin like that, we're now going to insert a channel of the slave. So we will go there, we'll go there to the in-out, and here are all the actual configurations that we've done to get audio in and out. I know I'll click on Sequoia 1. And now I'm actually going to use insert 6. There is a reason for it, but that will come clear later on. So I'm going to use insert 6. I'm going to press Sequoia 1. So then we need to configure the slave. So here I've brought up a template, and what I need to do is to be able to receive on channel 1. So I would go there, receiving on channel 1, and then go out on channel 1, and then that will send the audio back to Pro Tools. So I'll just take that out for a second. What we've got here is a piece of audio. I've made it mono. It was stereo. I've made it mono now, just so that we can do it on mono channels. It's easier to actually see. So if I press it in Pro Tools without going to the Sequoia, we have audio playing. Cool. So by going to the insert point and actually putting on Sequoia 1 or slave 1, however you've called it, this is now sending the audio to the slave and then back to the master, Pro Tools. So if we press play, this piece of audio is now going out of this channel here, into this slave here, into number 1, down the channel, and then back to Pro Tools. And you can either change the volumes there if you wanted, or we can change the volumes here if we wanted. Cool. So to activate these inserts, they don't actually have bypass. It's a shortcut in Pro Tools. You actually hold down Control and Command, or Control and Apple, and then click on it. And now it's not going to the slave now. And now it is going to the slave. And it's as easy as that to actually get the audio in and out of a slave. Okay, so let's just stop that. So, because we're actually going in and out of a slave system, there's actually going to be a delay in the audio for it to be processed by the slave system and then coming back to Pro Tools. If we had 2 pieces of audio playing, I'll just take it out of there. This is the same piece of audio, by the way. 2 channels there. If I activate the insert and press play, one would be slightly later than the other. So, as you can hear, it's got like a delay phase effect on. if we took it back to Pro Tools, it's perfectly in sync. So what we need to be able to do is to be able to sync the two systems together. Okay, so this is where we need the information about the actual system delay, the plug-in latency and the buffer. So basically we need to find out how long it takes for the audio to be in Pro Tools, go out to the slave system and back to Pro Tools. Now, the values that I'm going to add into this are going to be different on every different program and every different system. So I can only show you how we're going to do it with these Pro Tools and Sequoia. However, you will be able to find the information out, whether it's in the program itself of the slave, whether it's in the manual or email the manufacturer. But we need to be able to find out how long it takes to go back and forth so we can keep the audio completely in sync and completely sample accurate. The way that happens in Sequoia is that if we go to Program Preferences and we go to System Audio, click on that. Okay, Sequoia is actually telling us here, with a buffer size of 1024, Sequoia is actually telling us that it's going to take 1026 samples to come in and 1059 samples to go out, which is 22 milliseconds and 21 milliseconds. So we need to basically tell Pro Tools that it needs to delay this channel by 43 milliseconds. Okay. Now, the way that Pro Tools deals with that is by what we call hardware insert delay compensation. So if I go to the in-out setup again, hardware insert delay compensation. Okay, I'm now going to find the interface, which is this one. And I know it's going to take 43.42 milliseconds to go out to the slave and back to Pro Tools. Again, you would enter these values into the interfaces where you want to go in and out, and then Pro Tools will actually remember these values, and every time you open Pro Tools, these values will be there. You only have to configure it once. So we then press OK. So we can then play the two pieces of audio together, and they should be in time. And they are. They're perfectly in sync because we've told Pro Tools to delay it by 43.42 milliseconds. It's coming up in samples here, which is 2093. Okay, which is the 2084, but Pro Tools also assigned 9 samples to actually use this insert here. But Pro Tools does that automatically. So, how do we tell if it's perfectly in sync and perfectly sample accurate? Because we've got two pieces of audio playing, one that's in Pro Tools here that hasn't been sent out, and one that's going to the slave here. So if I reverse the phase on one of the channels, it should completely cancel if they're absolutely sample accurate. And if I turn on the phase, it completely cancels, which tells us that it's absolute sample accurate. Turn it off. The two channels are now playing, one that's in Pro Tools and one that's going through the slave. Okay, so if we don't want it to go to the slave, just do that. They're both now back in Pro Tools. If we want to go back through the slave, we do that. It's as simple as that. Once you know, stop that. Once you know the values of how long it takes to go back and forth, you can then put that into the hardware insert delay compensation menu. Pro Tools will take care of the rest. Okay, so let's bring in some more channels. Let's see if we can get this working on 16 in the master and then it's 16 running to the slaves. Just move you out of the way. Okay, so I've already put the Pro Tools insert on these extra channels. And let's bring back a piece of audio and let's press play. So there we have it, 16 channels that are staying in Pro Tools and 16 channels that are going to the slaves, and they're all completely sample accurate. Let's go to our snare drum, see what that's like. Yep, completely sample accurate. 16 in Pro Tools, 16 to the slave. And then obviously we can take these out at will. If I hold down Control and Apple and click the insert, this channel is now back in Pro Tools and not being sent to the slave. As you can see, it's not coming in channel 1. We can do the same with channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, or by holding down Control, Alt and Apple, I could do them all at once. And bring them all back. So quick. Very, very quick. Okay, let's go back to our piece of audio. And we'll do the same again. We can take channels in and out. There's barely a glitch. And back in. Okay, all working perfectly. As you can see there, when we do take a channel not going to the slaves, Pro Tools adjusts the delay compensation in itself. Another one, you can see it's not going through to the slave and it's adjusted itself down here. Put it back in, adjust again down here, put it back in, again adjust itself down here. Okay, great. So what's next on my list? Subgroups. Subgroups. What if we wanted to use a subgroup? Okay, so let's bring an auxiliary channel in. So basically I've created a auxiliary channel here, which is, that's not the one. Is it that one? Yes, it's that one. Okay, so this auxiliary channel, so sorry, this subgroup is going out to the mix. And I've chosen bus 11 and 12. So let's try, say, 4 of the channels, go into this subgroup, and then down a stereo pair in the slave. So I'll just take 1, 2, 3, 4 out of there. As you can see, the delay compensation has changed. And then I'm going to put these 4 channels out to bus 11 and 12. Bus 11 and 12. Okay, so what you can think, even though I'm putting bus 11 and 12 here, you can think, trying to think that bus 11 and 12 is at the top here, and then the way it flows will make a bit more sense. Okay, so I'm now going to insert, let's say, use channel 15 and 16. 15 and 16. Fantastic. We'll go across to the slave. We'll make 15 and 16 stereo. I can do this by doing this on the slave. Stereo in. So basically what's happening now is that these 4 channels here are going into the subgroup, down here, which is then sent to the slave and back, and then back down this channel here, which then goes out to the mix. So let's just see if these do that. Yeah, they do. It's a bit quieter because there's not 32 going through it. Okay, are they sample accurate? Let's bring that back. Completely sample accurate. For these 4 channels here, going to a subgroup, we can obviously then pan them all to the left, and as you can see here, they must be all to the left. Now they're all to the left. It's only coming through the left-hand channel of the slave. Okay, let's check our snare drum. Again, completely sample accurate. Okay, so let's now start bringing some plugins in, because above all, this is why we're doing this in the first place. So let's deal with Pro Tools first. So let's go to one of our insert points, and this is audio that's in Pro Tools. So we'll go to our plugins, we'll go to the first one, which is at the top of the list. And up it comes, and as you can see, the Pro Tools has adjusted itself here with the delay compensation. Let's press play. Yep, everything working fine. We can then turn the EQs on, and this makes no difference to the actual delay compensation. Try one more. There we go. Actual EQ. Okay, so that's in Pro Tools. So now let's put a plugin in on the slave. So what we're looking to do now to maintain sample accuracy is that we're looking to use zero latency plugins in the slave. Okay, so let's find a zero latency plugin. Okay, that's a zero latency plugin. We press play. Still perfectly sample accurate. Let's go to our snare drums. Perfect. Let's try another on channel 2. That is also a zero latency plugin. It's actually saying it there. And again, everything is perfectly in time. Let's go back to our piece of audio. Perfect. Okay, so let's try now some Acustica audio plugins, because this is the main reason why I'm doing this with the slaves. So let's put a zero latency Acustica audio plugin into the slave. We'll start at the top just because it's the first one in, and we're looking for the zero latency plugin. Let's put that in. Okay, so let's just have a little look at that. Oh, right. Even though it says it's zero latency, it is in fact actually taking 72 samples to process this plugin. Oh, we haven't compensated for that. Well, it's very easy to do so. All we would do then is go to our channel number 1, which is this. We know it's 72 samples, so we'd click there, put in -72, enter, and press play. It's now perfectly in time again. Okay, so let's try another one. Let's try purple. We'll go for the zero latency one on channel 2. Up it comes. I know it's that was my phone going off. I know it's 72 samples because I've done it many times, but we'll just check. Purple, zero latency, 72 samples. So we will go back to our master, enter -72, press play. Everything's perfectly in time and sample accurate again. Let's go to our snare drums. Perfect. Okay. Once the latency has been applied in Pro Tools here, again, by turning the EQ on and off makes no difference whatsoever. It's still 72 samples. Perfect. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try a full channel strip. Let's go for, I don't know, let's try gold. Gold, 0 latency. Up it comes. And let's have a look at the actual samples that it says it's going to delay. Okay, this 0 latency plugin, my phone going off again. I'll just turn it off. This 0 latency plugin says it's actually going to be, it's got 288 samples of latency. So again, channel 3, just got minus 288, enter, press play, and it's all sample accurate again. Let's go back to our piece of audio. And that's it. That's how we use the Acustica audio plugins within the Slave. Okay, so what we got left to do now? Okay, on my list it says subgroups again. So let's do the subgroup. So we'll go over to our channels over here on this, on the master. Bus 11 and 12 again. We'll put a couple through there. Bus 11 and 12. I'll have to take them out. So these two channels are going to get subgrouped together. Out bus 11 and 12. Again, think of bus 11 and 12 up here. We're then going to go out to the slave on 15 and 16. Okay. Let's go over to the slave. It's a stereo one, so I need to come in. Stereo, pan it center. Take this one out. Let's just see if that's working. Yes, it is. Okay, so let's put a plugin on this. And let's use, I don't know, Gold Comp, 0 latency. Okay, so we know, or really that I know, that this Gold Comp, 0 latency, is actually 72 samples. So we need to put that into Pro Tools by patching it in. It's what I call patching it in. So we wouldn't actually put the minus 72 on the auxiliary channel or the subgroup channel. We'd actually put it in on the two channels that is actually going to the auxiliary or subgroup channel. And press play again. Perfect. All working. Let's go to our snare drum. All working, all sample accurate. Okay, what's next on the list? Oh, stereo. What I've been using here is basically all mono channels, but it's exactly the same principle if you're wanting to use a stereo channel. All that would come up when you press that one there, it will come up as insert slave 1 and 2, and then you would make your slave 1 stereo as well. So it's exactly the same principles. So that's how we use a slave with Acustica audio plugins. However, that's not how we do it at Pro Tools Studios. We do it a different way, which is actually much, much simpler than that. So let's go to another method. Just before we do that, I've actually forgotten a couple of things. So I just need to show you another couple of things that can be done in this situation. And the first one is plugins. Yes. This channel here, as you know, is going to the slave. We can still, however, put plugins before we go to the slave. We can actually put, let's say, Gold Comp, let's say again. And Pro Tools will adjust itself because this has been done in the master in Pro Tools. So we can still use plugins before we go to the slave. And then when we come back from the slave, because this is the insert, we can still use plugins when we come back. So let's just try one. And again, Pro Tools has adjusted itself. Now, There's a couple of things to note here, and this is basically for Pro Tools HD users. Okay, so the general rule of thumb is, and this is why I put the actual insert on, the insert to the slave on this particular insert, because the general rule is if you're putting a plugin before it actually goes to the slave, you want to use what we call a native or an RTAS type plugin, a native one there. And then once you've come back, you then need to use a DSP plugin. And that's just the way that Pro Tools works in its audio engine, that it works better by putting a native before it and a DSP after it, because this one now is a DSP one, this API one here. If I actually change that to native, Pro Tools is not going to like it. So let's change that to native. Oh, it doesn't like the fact that you've put a native, then gone in and out of slave, and then put another native one in. So if I change that back to DSP, it's back within Pro Tools delay compensation maximum. Now we can move on to method 2, and that's how we do it. To method 2, which is what we use, and this is probably the most simplest method of doing it. And before I explain how to do it, it's all about understanding workflow. So for decades I've been using an analog console to mix with. And what we used to do is we used to bring up the session, say in Pro Tools, and we'd assign the 48 channels or whatever it is to the actual analog console. And then we would bring up, say, the first channel, which is the kick drum, and then we'd work on that, apply some EQ, whatever compression, whatever we're going to put on it, and bring up the snare drum, snare bottom, maybe the hi-hats, the overheads, rooms, and maybe we'll get to say like the toms, and we weren't quite happy with that where it's working on the desk. So then we'd want to insert a piece of analog hardware. So we'd then go over to say, let's say a Neve compressor or an SSL EQ or something, and we'd turn it on, and then we'd go over to the patch bay, get 4 patch cables, patch the actual unit in, and continue working. So what we wanted to do is basically replicate that workflow using Acustica audio plugins. So we use 3 slaves for this, okay, and the 3 slaves have got the same DAW, which is Sequoia, and they've all got the same RME PCIe cards. So they're all the same as the slaves. What we could do then is that we would make templates, say like of the gold console, and we would make a template of 24 golds on each slave, everything turned on and in sane mode. If I just go to that, where are you? Everything's turned on and it's in insane mode, because we can run 24 on each slave, which gives then a total of 72 channels of Acustica audio console. Now this doesn't have to be gold, obviously. It could be sand, it could be lime, pink, cream, whatever your desired choice is. While that's doing, what we would do is that we would basically load the insert on every single channel in Pro Tools. So we'd assign the first one to Sequoia 1 or Slave 1, the same to 2, same to 3, same to 4, same to 5, etc., etc. So every single channel is now going through the Acustica Gold console. And then we would basically press play. Okay, so I'm actually going to go to another video now to demonstrate this. Okay, so as you can see, all 72 channels are playing from Pro Tools out into 3 slaves with the same PCIe cards and the same DAW and the same channel strip on each of the slaves. So how is this possible? Well, basically it's because all 3 slaves have got the exact same amount of delay compensation or latency, because they're all going through 3 slaves which are exactly the same. Okay, so because of this, it opens up new possibilities. Okay, because all 72 channels are going through the Acustica Gold console, basically we don't need hardware insert delay compensation. So we'll basically go to the in and out setup again, hardware insert delay compensation. We can set these to 0 because every single channel is going through the exact same thing and coming back to Pro Tools at exactly the same time. What else it does mean is that to run as many channel strips as possible, basically the higher the buffer setting, the more plugins you can use because it uses less CPU. So on all 3 slaves, we went to our system audio, and we put all 3 slaves to 4096 buffer, pressed OK, which means we could use more Acustica plugins. Okay, so what else then we could do is, because the 0 latency plugins take more CPU than the actual normal versions, what we've done is we've loaded in the non-zero latency plugins. We just use the normal one, the normal gold, which then takes less CPU again, which then means we can run the 72 channels of Acustica Audio Gold in insane mode. And that's how we do that. And then we just basically bring up the 3 templates like I've just said. We actually activate the inserts within Pro Tools and press play. Once you've got enough slaves to be able to run every single channel through it, this is how to do it. You don't have to do anything except load up the templates and put an insert in Pro Tools and press play. But this also brings up some more possibilities because, okay, so we're running 72 channels through 3 slaves. However, we're not running any in our master. So when we go to our system usage with 72 gold plugins on the 3 slaves is at 0. So we could now emulate our workflow that we used to have when we came through the analog console. So basically we press play and we bring up channel 1, which may be the kick drum, and we'd work on that. We'd apply some EQ and some compression and everything else until we're happy with that. That's cool. Then we'd bring up, say, like the snare drum, and we'd do the same on that until we're happy. And then we'd say put the snare bottom in and the hi-hats and everything else and overheads and rooms and everything else. And because they're still using the same amount of plugin latency on each slave, everything is still perfectly sample accurate. Okay, so what if we got to say, let me just stop that. What if we got to say the tom-toms and we weren't happy with what the gold was doing? What we could do then is we could insert another Acustica plugin, and supposing we wanted to use, let's say, purple on the toms. We've then got 2 options of how we do it. Because our our master is at 0, we've got plenty of power in our master. It's applied some delay compensation but Pro Tools is taking care of that. It's still going in and out of the slaves at exactly the same time. We could then EQ and this, that and the other until we're happy. But more importantly, you have to leave on, this is channel 11 and 12, you have to leave on in the slave the actual gold one, because that is maintaining the sample accuracy throughout all 72 channels. Okay, makes sense so far. So what if we didn't want to put them on in our master? We actually wanted to put the purples on in one of the slaves. Okay, so let's do that. So we'll make them inactive for now. So we would then go to, say, our toms, which is channel 11 and 12. We would then go to our purple, but then we would use the 0 latency one on top of the gold that's already in. Now, going back to our first method, what we would have to do now, we know it takes 72 samples does the 0 latency, so we would go to our master Pro Tools and just enter -72. Enter and press play. And that's it. So there's two options for putting an extra plugin in. You can do it in the master and you don't have to do anything, or you can put it on the slave and then put -72 into this delay compensation here in Pro Tools. Now, I'll stress once again, it might not be 72 samples depending on which DAW you're using. It could be higher or it could be lower. Right. Subgroups. Okay. So because all the audio has been sent to the slaves and back and is all coming back at exactly the same time, we can basically use our master, which is Pro Tools, exactly the same as we would do as if the audio wasn't going out to any slaves. So, for example, if we wanted to make, let's say, a subgroup for the drums, we'll get a subgroup. I've done one here somewhere. Where are we? Okay, so I've created an auxiliary channel in Pro Tools and it's coming out to the mix. I've actually put bus 19 and 20 in there. Okay, so what we would do then is to take all, say, our drum channels and go out to bus 19 and 20 and we'll press play. So this auxiliary subgroup is basically going to the mix because all these channels have already been to the Acustica console, and then we now subgroup it into this auxiliary subgroup channel. Okay, so what if we wanted to use a parallel chain? Okay, so let's put these back to the mix. And we want to use, let's say, like a parallel compressor on the drums. Okay, so let's bring up another plugin on the actual, which I've used gold for. Okay, we would then take an auxiliary send from the drum channels to 20. So these now are paralleled into this for some parallel compression, and we'll press play. We're just treating Pro Tools, the master, exactly the same as we normally would. It's as simple as that. What else have we got on my list to go through? Automation. Okay, automation. With automation, there's a few ways to do it. If, for example, we were doing the guitars and the guitars were coming out of, let's say, channels 13 and 14, just so I can keep it on this screen. Basically, what we would do, the way it works for us, we would go to our gold. We would say turn off the EQ. Okay. Maybe we weren't happy with that EQ. Maybe we wanted to put, say, like a pink. Let's find a pink on the guitars. Pink 2 EQ. There comes the pink. We can then EQ that pink. We didn't have to do anything with Pro Tools regarding delay compensation because it's already compensated for it here. Pro Tools does that automatically. And then for the automation, we would basically automate it just like we would normally do in Pro Tools. Oh, wrong one. We would then add the automation and process the automation exactly the same. So we're doing two things there. We're actually adding an EQ and we're able to do the automation in Pro Tools. So what if we wanted to do the automation in the slaves? It's still possible because of MIDI controllers. And I have done this quite a few times over many years. But let me tell you, MIDI controllers in Sequoia is absolutely terrible. It just doesn't work. I've been using Sequoia for 14 years and I haven't got it to work right yet. It's just absolutely rubbish at it. However, Reaper is fantastic at it. It will follow the MIDI controller changes perfectly, so you could actually automate the EQ through MIDI controllers. Now, because we use PCI E-cards, I think they're, what is it called, multi-client or whatever it's called. Basically, on this slave, we could have both Sequoia and Reaper working at the same time. And then we just decide which channels want to go through Reaper and which channels want to go through Sequoia, so that if we did want to automate it via the slaves, we could just use them two channels in Reaper and use MIDI control changes. So that's basically it, guys. 72 channels we're using, 3 slaves, all sample accurate, loads of power left, and I think that's it for that one, guys. So it's very easy to set up. It's very, very simple. You don't need hardware insert delay compensation. You just load your templates up, put the inserts in and press play. Okay, so let's go to method 3. So to method 3, guys. So let me say that this third method, it's a bit old school. It's very primitive. It's a bit messy, and it's not the ideal way to do it, but it does actually show you another way of doing it. Maybe you haven't got inserts in Pro Tools, you've just got ins and outs. I suppose you could do it this way. But first, let me tell you a story about how we used to do this, because when we first got Pro Tools when was it? It was 2000. It was December 2001, which is 18 years ago. OS 9, Pro Tools 5 HD on OS 9. Like I say, it didn't have delay compensation. That didn't come in till much later, and it got shipped with a thing called Wave Mechanics Pitch Doctor, which basically was our only autotune of its day, so we had to use that. And every time we put that plugin on, Wave Mechanics Pitch Doctor, it came in with a little box at the bottom of the plugin saying 89 milliseconds of delay. So the way we used to have to work with that plugin is we used to have to say, take the vocal, let's say the vocal's this channel. We'd have to go to our nudge, we'd have to go to minutes and seconds, put 0.89's in there, put 0.89 milliseconds, and basically nudge it left. And then it would be perfectly in time with everything else. So I suppose you could apply this method to your slaves if you wanted. So, for example, if you need to know the values of how long it takes to go from your master to your slave and then back to your master. Supposing it is, I don't know, let's say 1024. 1024. You'd add 1024 into there, and you basically nudge it to the left, and they'll be sample accurate again. So like I say, it's very primitive, not our preferred method, but it does show you another way of doing it. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that one because obviously I think things have moved on since then. Okay.